Welcome to the Sports Spectrum podcast, everyone. My name is Jason Romano, and this is a different type of podcast than we've done before. Usually we have guests on and we talk about their background, what God has done in their life, some cool things happening. And this is a little different. If you listen to the very first episode of this podcast, released just about a year ago, we had a Marlins pitcher named Adam Conley on, and along with Adam was the Miami Marlins team chaplain, Chris Lane. And our guest today is Chris. We bring him back. And the reason we're having Chris on is because not only is he the chaplain for the Marlins, but he's also the director of First Priority, which is a pretty cool ministry going on down in the Miami area, which ministers to public middle and high school students in Southeast Florida. And obviously with what's happened in the last couple days and what happened on Wednesday, Valentine's Day at Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, with the mass shooting and 17 dead and numerous more injured. In talking to Chris and following him, becoming a friend of his and seeing his posts on Facebook and just kind of the work that he's doing down there, the response that he's sort of been kind of tasked to do along with others in dealing with tragedy, I thought it would be good to have Chris on and kind of describe some of the things that he's seen down there. Chris, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good.
It's good to talk to you, man. Unfortunately, under these kind of circumstances, I wish it wasn't this conversation that we were having. But, I wanted to just ask you really the scene down there. I know you were down there. You were getting ready to kind of do some things that day with students as it was. And then this happens. Can you take us back to Wednesday and just where you were and what kind of day you were having until obviously the shooting took place and you started receiving calls?
Yeah, like everybody knows, it was Valentine's Day, so it was just a pretty typical day for most everybody. We were actually with our First Priority staff. We have a series of networking coaching lunches each month with youth pastors all across South Florida, anywhere from about 15 to 17 different lunches a month with our staff, engaging youth pastors that do ministry on public school campuses, because we have about 215, 220 public schools where we do ministry on in the South Florida area.
Mm.
So, we had a lunch that day in Coral Springs, which is the town next to Parkland. And at that meeting, we probably had about, 15 or 18 of our, campus volunteer coaches, youth pastors there. And a normal time, I spoke at the lunch, like I would normally do, just sharing about, doing our First Priority clubs, which are Christian clubs on a public school campus, just doing them with excellence. And our clubs are really evangelistic. So the whole goal is to really share the gospel, equip kids to share the gospel, and see these new kids get connected to a church. So I was really just sharing our normal vision. Everything was very normal at that lunch, and a lot of excitement, a lot of good fellowship, and some prayer. And everybody was leaving, and kind of talking about, hey, we're heading over to this school, and it happened to be that day that the Stoneman Douglas High School club, First Party Club, was meeting after school, and they had a project they were going to stop by. These volunteers were stopping by the Dollar Tree to pick up some things. So the kids were doing this project to reach out on campus, and everything was good. Me and a couple of our other team members headed back to our ministry headquarters. We were going back there to do some stuff and pray and everything else. And as we got back there, the ironic thing is we got a text message from one of our guys on the field that said, "Hey, pray for this school. There's a bomb threat." Now, it wasn't Stoneman Douglas High School, was another school. So we would, that's not really, it's kind of uncommon to get that, but we do get, obviously we get text messages throughout the day or different things from our team, like, "Hey, I'm here and this is happening, pray for this." But, bomb threat. But most of the time when you get those kind of things, it's like, "Hey, we're praying for sure." But then, you click on the news and the computer and you find out, oh, that's just a false alarm, and it's just some kid messing around. So we prayed for the bomb threat. We kept doing our, kind of work there in the ministry center, and then my wife calls, and she's like, "Hey, did you?" And you see your wife call. You usually answer. So Valentine's Day,
Of
I'm in the
course.
meeting. I say, "Hey, that's my Valentine." I answer the phone from my wife, and she says, "Hey, did you hear that there's an active shooter at Douglas High School?" And I said, no way, really? So again, we just got this thing about the bomb threat, and that didn't turn out. So it's like, okay, this sounds bad, but it's probably just another rumor. So we click on the news and on the computer, and it's they're talking about stuff, and they say, well, some people are saying it's probably balloons that are popping because there's a lot of balloons on campus from Valentine's Day, and maybe that's just what it is. And texts are coming in, and everybody's like, well, I heard it wasn't true. I heard this is the thing, and so everybody kind of dismissed it for 2 or 3 minutes. And then, somebody else popped in and said, hey, man, did you see this is really legit? And they started, we put it on, and then there comes all the cops and the SWAT and everything rolling in.
Mm.
And we knew we had people on the ground there. So we started to get a hold of them, and they were like, yeah, we on our way here, there was some commotion, but we weren't, it wasn't too big yet. So we got inside where they began to set up the perimeter, but then the school was on lockdown. So they were kind of stuck in the middle. They couldn't get on campus, but they really couldn't get out of the perimeter area. And they're in the middle of it and don't know what's going on. And so we're watching everything unfold, and we're staying in touch with them. And, they're praying now together, and they're praying with families and talking to people, because it's just, mass hysteria. And at the time, even then it was, one person came out on a stretcher, and, they're not really certain what it is. And obviously now we know it was horrific, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it started to unfold, and it was just, those kind of things happen, and you're just like, I really can't believe this. I mean, it's been, like, 36 hours for me now, and it's still like, you're like, I don't know if this really happened. I mean, I know it didn't. I was there yesterday, and a lot of different things revolving around it, but it's still, I think everybody's still a little bit numb.
Mm. What were you when you arrived? Obviously, you went and you ministered at some
Mm-hmm.
point to the people
Mm-hmm.
there. You know the school. Obviously, it's part of first priority in the ministry that you work with. What was the scene when you got there? Whether it was right after or whether it was yesterday. When I say yesterday, I mean Thursday, the 15th, the day
Yeah.
after the shooting. Tell me about that.
Well, I think the best way I can explain it is that people were like zombies. I
Mm.
mean, there's just hundreds. If it's a very big school, there's over, I think, 3,000 kids that go there. It's one of the largest schools in our district, and a very good school. Very great sports there. I mean, Anthony Rizzo went there. He
Yeah.
just actually spoke at the vigil. He left spring training and flew there and spoke at the vigil. I mean, he's been actively engaged in that campus. It's an area where Eric Hosmer grew up. Juan Pierre lives in that neighborhood. There's a lot of baseball players, former and current pro guys that live there. So it's a very engaged, a very nice, a very upscale community. And literally, when you're there, when I was there, engaging in that. Right after, it's like people are just zombies. They're just walking around like, and at the first contact there, they hadn't even really released the names publicly yet. So people kind of knew, and there were still people that they weren't sure, like they haven't heard, but obviously their friends were assuming that they were one of the victims. You know what I mean? Like, because they knew, hey, right now this is the death toll, but they haven't released names necessarily, so maybe they would leak out or a family would share, but it hadn't been official. So it was just kind of surreal to see kids just walking around this huge park, this huge field, kind of looking for other friends. And then when they would see them, it would be like, oh my goodness, you're okay. And it's fun. It's fun. It's interesting because we were talking about this. Everybody, people would know that their friends were okay via social media or texting, but it shows that there's not a real human side to that. When
Yeah.
they actually saw them is when they broke down and they would cry and they would hug. So that was just a real, interesting scene to see so many people just kind of wandering and looking. And I guess as a believer, you look at that and you go, there's so many hopeless people that are just looking for some answer, looking for a friend or looking for somebody to hug. And when they finally found that, it was just overwhelming to them. you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, obviously, if you heard Chris on our first podcast, you know the reason we had him on was to talk about the Jose Fernandez tragedy back in 2016, the Marlins pitcher who was tragically killed at a very young age, and just dealing with grief, dealing with death, mourning. You know, your role as a team chaplain with the Marlins then probably, I'm guessing, was similar to your role now as this executive director of First Priority, which is ministering to high school students. Can you just talk about your role in this and trying to be a comforter, trying to just be there and praying and hugging and loving people, and just kind of what that's like when you're going through such tragedy? You know, I mean, I'm trying to ask the right question and I honestly don't know how to ask it, but just talk about your role, I guess, in this.
Yeah, and you know, that is so fluid. It just, everything happens so fast. And I mean, one of the great things about, you know, technology today is that people know so fast what's happened. So
Mm,
the calls, the texts, the emails, the 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 contacts on Twitter and social media to me and our staff has been incredible. I mean, at times overwhelming. You're just like, man, people are calling, like, what can I do? What could I, you know, be involved in? What can I? And so the great thing is we have an incredible network already of churches in that community. And then we have another organization that's with our senior pastors called Church United. So we just said, let's get everybody together. We'll be, you know, we'll be the point people on the ground. These other, the pastors can be the point people with raising funds and making bigger things happen in the community. And we'll do the stuff with the students on campus. And so we've networked all of our people together. We've already prayed. We've already had some of the kids there that are Christians that are a part of the First Party Club to pray over them. And we're setting up a time next week. We've already got a person coming in that was a survivor from Columbine,
mm.
that does this, you know, professional speaker and talking and sharing their experiences and how to. We want to fill these kids up and encourage them and pray over them and give them the hope of the gospel and Christ in their life, so that they, when they step on campus, whenever that school opens back up, they're going to face things. Their friends are going to maybe look to them for answers, or maybe ask them, how could your God let this happen? How could this be? Why is this? So there's great opportunity for ministry in this. And we've already seen some great things happen. You know, the churches came together yesterday at noon and we had a prayer vigil, and me, along with several other key pastors and ministry leaders, were there up front praying, and we released these balloons, and a great display of unity in the church, but prayer for the community. So we really see our role right now is just really facilitating all of the on ground, you know, touch points. We have the Billy Graham Association has brought in two those Chaplin's trailers. So we're as we speak right now, navigating and negotiating where those are going to be set up in the community, getting the churches out there to be outside of those. So we're really the on the ground boots people that are organizing all of the ministry to minister to, you know, over 3,000 students.
Yeah.
And you know, and it's going to be, you know, what Satan meant for harm, God's going to turn into good. We always know that's the case. And that's the power of the gospel.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. And we'll just do a couple more questions here. I don't want to keep you too long. I know you got more important work to do than just talk to me on a podcast. But when tragedy hits and so many are going through, I've never dealt with any kind of tragedy like this, not at all. But I always hear people talk about purpose in the pain and trying to know that these tears are not in vain, that they're going to be used for some kind of good out there. And it's hard to find good when you see such a tragedy happen. And so many of these tragedies have happened just in the past 6 months to a year. Can you tell us a story, or just maybe share in a general term the good that you've seen come out of something like this, even a couple days after the tragedy happened? Just kind of how God has somehow worked or orchestrated something positive to happen through this
Yeah.
horrific thing.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of different threads. One of them for me personally, yesterday, like I said, we had a community wide, you know, prayer vigil, and there was a lot that had gotten. There were several that happened. You know, one church just had a special service last night, and in the community, you know, the city did one that was obviously not a Christian thing, but that's the one that Anthony Rizzo spoke at. But the one that the churches came together and did was just a real prayer, specific prayer and worship, and a real sacred time. At the end of that, it was emotional, and I was just, coming off, and the governor was there and everything else coming off the stage. And I saw a guy that I know this guy. My son, one of my sons played travel baseball over the years with his son, and he was a freshman. And this shooting happened in the freshman building.
Hmm.
So my son that's a freshman has several friends, I think four of them that he played with on this travel team that I actually helped coach several years ago that went to Douglas. So we had been, from the minute it happened, kind of searching the names and looking on Facebook to see if they were okay and kind of hearing from their parents, but obviously trying to, we know everybody's getting inundated. And this guy, I saw him in the crowd, and he was coming straight for me with his son and his wife and his daughter. And, they don't know the Lord yet, but we're praying, and we have been sharing with him. And he just came up and gave me the biggest hug. And he said, I saw the governor and I saw the mayor. I just wanted to come and see you. I didn't care about anybody, but I know that, we're here for a reason. And this guy gives me a big hug, and he's not an emotional guy. And it's just like, he knows, man, there's something more. There's a peace that comes from Christ. We could stand there and pray and know that, man, this is a tough time, but we know what Jesus said. He said, do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God. Believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have not told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me,
Hmm.
that you may also be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. And Jesus is talking about heaven in John chapter 14 there. I'm going to make a place for you. And that's our hope. The hope has a name, and it's Jesus. And today the community is hurting, and, we want to be sensitive to the grieving of people, and let them have space and time and be there for them. But there's also, at the end of the day, the answer is Jesus. And that's what we have to, really take that message to people now, because that's the only hope that they have.
And that's a great piece of encouragement. And it kind of leads me to my last question, because there's so many people that are around the country and around the world. I mean, if you just go on social media, you see a angry group of people out there who just, and in a lot of ways, it's obviously it's justified, and you can't kind of choose one anger being right or wrong versus the other. But there's a lot of division right now, a lot of anger on one side that's got gun control, comments, and there's other sides that are talking about, why this is happening and what we need to do. And I'm looking at it from a sense of just like the killings need to stop. We just need to protect our kids. And
Amen.
there's a lot of, like you said, hopeless people, real emotion, real anger. Uh, as believers, and a lot of people who listen to this are not believers, Chris. So just leave us with some encouragement for those listening here, not just on what you just mentioned about the hope in Christ, but just some encouragement for our listeners who are struggling right now, who are so angry, who have such strong opinions on many sides to just seeing these tragedies happen. Leave us with some encouragement.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that, I can say is that, on our first priority club was about to meet that day, and 2 weeks before, one of our staffers was there. My sister actually helps volunteer at that school too.
Mm.
And they had a video of the kids in the room that day, and just them eating pizza and sharing the gospel and having their meeting. And we found out yesterday, the day after the shooting, that one of the girls in that room was one of the victims, Helena Ramsey. And on the Today Show, uh, the day after, they interviewed one of her friends, Samantha, and Samantha talked about her friend. And the great thing is that in this tragedy, we know that for certain that Helena Ramsey uh, knows the Lord and has a personal relationship with Him, and that wasn't just the end of her life
Yeah.
at as a high school student, as a junior. That wasn't the end of it. It was the end of her physical time here on earth, but there is eternal life. And we know today, with 100% confidence, that she is with, Jesus. She She is in heaven. She's in a better place. There is no more suffering. There's no more pain. There is comfort in the arms of Christ. So what seems to be a tragedy is awful that happened here on earth. There is more than this. And I think for all of us, we have to just think, as we look around here on planet Earth, like, is this it? Because it seems like we're always searching, we're always striving to have more, we're always trying for satisfaction, and the things of this world, they don't last, and we all know that. We try, and it's like, hey, let me just get a better job or a bigger house or a nicer car or go here on vacation. But all that stuff, and the Bible teaches this, will not last. The thing that matters most is that personal relationship we have with Jesus that gives us hope and gives us a future and secures heaven for us one day. And that is in the midst of all this tragedy. We know today that Helena Ramsey is with Jesus. And she came to school that day never thinking this would happen. Like, most of us don't know when we're going to die.
Right.
But the statistics tell us that we all will. So we have to be ready for that. And the greatest thing we can do is to turn our life over to Jesus and put our trust in him.
He is Chris Lane. Tough situation going down there, Chris. And I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the work that you're doing. Obviously, the love that you're sharing with so many, and being the executive director of First Priority. It's interesting how unique this situation is when you're building a ministry and founding this ministry to minister to 500,000 students, and so much potentially in public schools in the Southeast Florida area, and sharing the love of Christ. And then suddenly this happens, and suddenly First Priority is literally put into action. And listen, I appreciate you. Hopefully we'll have you back on again and talk some more, some more baseball and some more Miami Marlins talk and what God is doing with them this year. But I really appreciate you, appreciate your heart. And we're praying for you and so many others down there that are in the midst of all this. And man, I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for
Amen,
coming on.
Jason. Amen. Thank you very much for all that you do, man. We love listening to the podcast, and congrats on the book.
Thanks so much, my friend. I'll talk to you soon.
You got it.